Hello children, today we will learn fourth chapter of history, the travels, dikus and vision of a golden age. In this chapter we will learn how the life of tribal people affected during British rule and how they had tried to overcome that problems. So let me begin with this story of Birsa Munda. In 1895, a man named Birsa was seen roaming the forest and village of Chotanagpur in Bihar. People said he had miraculous power, he could cure all diseases and multiply grain. Virsa himself declared that God has appointed him to save his people from trouble, free them from the slavery of dikus. Diku means outsider. Soon thousands began following Birsa, believing that he was Bhagavan, that is God, and had come to solve their problem. That was the belief of the people. Let's know who was Birsa. Birsa was born in a family of Mundas. Munda means a tribal group that live in Chotanagpur, but his followers included other tribals of the region like Santals and Orans. All of them in different ways were unhappy with the changes they were experiencing and the problem they were facing under the British rule. So their familiar ways of life seemed to be disappearing and their livelihood under the threat. That was the condition of the tribal people during British rule. So here we have some questions to know in this chapter. What problems did Birsha set out to resolve? Who were the outsider being referred to as dikus, and how did they enslave the people of the region? What was happening to the tribal people under the British? How did their life change? These are, as I said, some of the questions that we are going to read about in this chapter. So let's start with the tribal life. Most of the tribal costumes and rituals that were very different from those laid down by the Brahmanas, as there was no division of class, social division in the tribal society or tribal group of people. All those who belonged to same tribe thought themselves as sharing common ties of kingship, but we can see some difference in socially and economically in the tribal group. So this is a brief description about the life of the tribal people. So next we have is how did tribal groups live? Some were live as jhum cultivators who were doing sifting cultivation. This was done on small patch of land, mostly in forests. The cultivators cut the tree tops, allow sunlight to reach the ground, and burn the vegetation on the land to clear it for cultivation. They spread the potash from the fire, which contained potash to fertilize the soil. They broadcast the seed, that is, scattered the seed on the field instead of plugging the land and sowing the seeds. Once the crop was ready and harvested, they moved to another field. This is the process of doing this sifting cultivation or jhum cultivation. First, they have to clear the forest land, small patch of land. After that, they have to burn the vegetation there and as a spread to increase the fertility of soil and seed broadcast and grow crops and harvest it. And after the fertility is reduced, then they sieve to another patch of land. That is the process of doing this sifting cultivation. By doing this, some of the tribal people were earning their livelihood, and this is how they live. Next, we have some other tribal groups live as hunters and gatherers. So many reasons tribal groups live by hunting animals and gathering forest produce, and they saw the forest essential for survival as they get everything needed for them from the forest. The Khons of Orissa were such a community. They regularly went out on collective hunts and then divided the meat among themselves. They ate fruits and roots collected from the forest and cooked food with the oil they extracted from the seed of sal and mahua. They also sold the forest produce in the local market. So, whatever their need is provided to them by the forest. So, forest very important to them. Forest is very, very important to this tribal people. Next, we have some tribal group who settle and do cultivations. Even before the 19th century, many from within the tribal groups had begun settling down and cultivating their field in one place year after year. That means they permanently settled and doing agriculture there. They don't they didn't move from one place to another. They began to use ploughed and gradually got right over the land they live on. In many cases, like the Mundas of Chotanagpur, the land belonged to the clan as a whole. So land belonged to the clan as a whole. Where they live, that land is belonged to them. All the members of the clan were registered as descendants of the original settler who had first cleared the land. So they lived together in a place and were doing these settled agricultural activities. And these settled agriculturalists are more developed than other group of tribal people. Very often, some people within the clan acquire some power than others. That means among this settled agriculturalists, some acquire power than the others, and these people who acquired power became chief, and those people who didn't acquire power remain as followers. Powerful men often rented their land instead of cultivating it themselves. That means chiefs rented their land to the other followers or other villages. British officials saw settled tribal groups like the Gonds and Santal as more civilized than hunter gatherers or shifting cultivators. Those who live in the forest were considered to be wild and savage. They needed to be settled and civilized. So that was the concept of British people regarding the different tribal groups in India. Next, we have this question: how did colonial rule affect tribal lives? Let's see this. What happened to the tribal chiefs? As we all know, tribal chief was the most powerful among the tribal groups of people. Before the arrival of the British, many areas the tribal chiefs were important people. They enjoyed certain amount of economic power and had the right to administer and control their territories. In some places, they had their own police and decided on the local rules of land and forest management. That means these chiefs were managing the administration of the area where tribal people live. They have their own rules and regulation to look after the village. That was how tribal chief lived. But after the British rule, the function and the power of the tribal chief changed considerably. They were allowed to keep their land title over a cluster of villages and rent out land, but they lost much of their administrative powers and were forced to follow the laws made by the British official in India. That means they had lost the power they had earlier. Then they also had to pay a tribute to the British and discipline the tribal groups on behalf of the British. They lost the authority they had earlier enjoyed among their people and were unable to fulfill their traditional function. This means that power of the chief lost under the British rule. What happened to the shifting cultivators? The British were uncomfortable with the groups who moved about and did not have a fixed home. They wanted tribal groups to settle down and become peasant cultivators. Why they wanted tribal groups to settle down and become peasant cultivators? Because settled peasants were easier to control and administer than people who were always on the move. That is one reason. And another reason is the British also wanted a revenue source for the state. So they introduced land settlement. That is, they measured land and fixed the revenue demand for the state. So we easily know the two reasons why British wanted to make tribal groups to settle, especially the shifting cultivators. One reason is easier to control if they settle in a permanent place. Other one is uh, they could have a revenue source. Next, we have some peasants were declared landowners. Among the peasants, some peasants were declared landowners and remaining were tenants. And the tenants were to pay rent to the landowners. And this landowner again paid revenue to the state. That was a system of paying revenue. So the British effort to settle jhum cultivator was not very successful. As we know, British if had tried to make these jhum cultivators to settle, but British effort to settle jhum cultivator was not very successful. Settled ploughed cultivation is not easy in areas where there is and scarce water and the soil is dry. In fact, jhum cultivators who look to ploughed cultivation often suffer since their field did not produce good yields. So the jhum cultivators in the northeast India insisted on continuing their traditional practice. So we know the reason why jhum cultivators were protesting against the British. They tried to do this permanent agriculture system, but they didn't get success in that as water is scarce, soil is dry, and then because of that, their production is low. Because of such reason, jhum cultivators in Northeast India protested against and they wanted their traditional way of doing this agriculture. So there was widespread protest against the British. The British had to ultimately allow them the right to carry on shifting cultivation in some part of the forest. So with this, we end up this first part of the chapter. Second part will done in next class. So thank you all.